Hello and a very warm welcome to episode 24 of the Green Bean podcast. My name's Katie, this is Jack, and we are both really glad to see you. How are you doing? You're joining us in our studio in Devon, in the southwest of England, and a special warm welcome to you if this is your first visit. I am an illustrator by trade, but I also dabble in various other crafty and creative pursuits, and this podcast covers all of them. So in this episode, I've got a bit of drawing to share with you, some knitting, some sewing, some spinning, and some mending, as well as a lovely walk out on Dartmoor, which is the national park close to where we live. So settle in with whatever project you're working on, and maybe a cup of tea or something a little stronger, and I hope you enjoy the episode. In terms of drawing, things have been pretty exciting and kind of different in my studio lately. So I'm not sure if I've mentioned on the podcast before, certainly I've mentioned on Patreon, that I made the decision earlier this year to stop taking on illustration clients so that I could focus more on creating my personal work, projects for my shop, and creating podcasts, which are some of my favourite things to do. So about halfway through last month, I got to the end of my last piece of client work. So I had people booked in who had been waiting since before I made this decision. And since then, I've had no particular ties on my time or deadlines, which is both wonderful and terrifying in equal measure. I'm somebody who has always tended to use deadlines to motivate myself. get a sense of discipline and moving forward. But in my personal work, I'm really looking to move away from that because it doesn't feel like the right way to be approaching something that I really love. And that's a difficult balance because illustration for me is work, it's my job, it's the way that I make my living. So it's really important that I take it seriously and keep my output of work at a financially viable level. But I also don't want that to kill my joy in the process. And that's something that I've experienced in the past and talked about at length in some previous episodes, talking about my zine, The Green Bean. In its original incarnation, I ended up putting a lot of pressure on myself to deliver issues by a certain date within a certain time frame. And I think, as well as having an impact on my mental health, it also had a negative impact on the quality of the work. So going forward, I'm really looking at changing that, and I'm working with a mentor who's helping me address those challenging work patterns that have come from other areas of my life and from, just existing in a world where that attitude to work and, always striving to achieve and do more and do more and do more is encouraged. And, stepping away from that and trying to do things differently is a challenge, but I'm welcoming it and looking forward to sharing that process with you a little bit. So the thing that I've been starting to work on is a new issue of The Green Bean, and I've actually talked about this on the podcast before in an episode, I believe it was last year. I started work on this new issue, which is going to be all about lichens. I haven't made a huge amount of progress on it since then because I've been tied up with various bits of client work going on and some health issues in the background too. But now I've got this space in my schedule that I've created, I'm really looking forward to getting back on with it. So the Green Bean page that I'm working on today is actually a double-page spread comic of defining what a lichen is. And I think this is a really important way to start off the zine because lichens are pretty weird. And I think unless you've done research or reading about them, you wouldn't necessarily know that lichens are not a single organism. So they're neither a plant nor a fungus, but they are a symbiosis of both. And it's just amazing. And I really wanted to create a comic that expresses like how that works scientifically without being like overly full of jargon and intimidating, but at the same time expresses my wonder about lichens because they are incredible things. And I love the fact that like these tiny overlooked organisms that you could walk by and maybe not even notice have this incredibly complex biological mode of existence going on that scientists don't even fully understand. It's something I get really nerdy and fascinated about. So I've really enjoyed making this comic, which both explains and expresses some of that. I actually started this comic a while back last year, so picking it up again has felt strange. But luckily I had taken quite meticulous notes, so I wasn't confused about what any of the content would be. And you'll be able to see in the background of where I'm working that there is a lot of rough pencil sketches, and that's what I use to plan what I'm going to be doing. So first of all, I'll do a storyboard, which will happen on a separate piece of paper. And that is me just figuring out the spacing and the layout of what I want to say and how it's going to fit together. And then I will transfer that storyboard in pencil onto the actual paper that I'm going to use. And it's not any kind of special drawing paper that I'm using here. This is just recycled photocopy paper. And I use that because basically it's not intimidating. My comics generally are not things that I want to sell as original artworks or to be like archive ready in any way. They're all going to be scanned in and processed digitally in various ways. So I like to do it on a really nice cheap paper because it's affordable for a start, especially if you're churning out a lot of work. It's good to have paper that doesn't cost £3 a sheet. But also it just makes it less scary, you know, when you've got expensive materials. I think it can be frightening and overwhelming to make a start and you're afraid of ruining things. And I can honestly say that that fear doesn't go away, not even for having worked 10 years as a professional artist. I still have that fear of a blank sheet of paper sometimes. And this is one of the tricks that I use to help myself deal with that. And the pen that I'm using is a Pigma Micron 01. That's a 1/4 millimetre line width. And that's the pen that I most frequently use. It's a waterproof fine liner, so if I did want to get any coloured inks involved in my work, I can use those over the top and they won't smudge the ink. I won't be doing that on this weak and flimsy cheap paper, but if I do work on watercolour paper, this pen is compatible with that as well. The other slightly smaller illustration project that I've been working on that I'm excited to share with you is collecting my mini comics into a compilation that's going to be printed. So I have now several mini comics that I've published on Instagram over the last few years that cover subjects like mental health and sewing and mental health related to sewing. And I just felt like I wanted to put them together into a little collection to have them printed rather than just existing digitally. So I've decided to call those bean sprouts as like an offshoot from the green bean and a place where I can put more standalone comics rather than things that fit around a certain theme, which I always like to do for the green bean zine. And I designed a little cover for them, which I really, really enjoyed working on using Scratchboard. And those have actually gone off to the printers this week, so they should be arriving with me fairly soon. I'm pretty excited about that. We've had some pretty delightful weather over here in the UK the last few weeks. It's definitely feels like it's turned the corner into spring, which you should hope would happen by the beginning of May. It's been really quite warm and very pleasant to be outside and walking, spending time on the moors. And I often find that when the weather starts to turn warm, I lose my motivation a little bit with my knitting, and I wonder if anyone else has been finding the same lately. I'm just feeling a little bit lacking direction and flitting from project to project, not really being able to focus on anything in particular. And that's fine, but yeah, it's when it gets to that point that there's the danger that you're going to cast on too many new things, or just, spend your time working a little bit on so many different projects that it feels like nothing's really moving anywhere. But nonetheless, I've got a project that you will have seen before quite a long time ago that I've picked back up. And it makes sense that I've picked it up as I've started work on the new Green Bean zine, because this is going to be a pattern that goes in that zine, because it's a cardigan based on my love of lichens. And you won't be able to see it because I'm knitting it inside out, so let's have a pause for a moment and show you. I've made quite a bit of progress since you last saw it. It's still not quite a cardigan, but definitely getting some good length going on. It would help if I didn't drop all of my stitches off the needles while I did that. Let's just catch those back up. The advantage of working with a fairly sticky woolen spun wool is that those stitches are not going anywhere, so it's all right, everybody's safe. Let's pull those needles out a little bit further. So, in case you missed the last episode where I talked about this project, this is a design that I've come up with myself based on lichens, obviously, and it's knitted in River Knits Jacob. The darker shade is a natural brownish grey, and the pale greeny blue shade is a colour that Becky of River Knits has dyed specially for me for this project. It's called Lichen Fancier. It's just perfect. I'm not sure it'll show up on camera, but it's ever so subtly tonal, so there's different shades of greens and blues coming through in here, which I really, really like. I wanted it to look slightly variegated, but not with loads and loads of contrast, so it's just perfect. So I'm knitting the cardigan in the round, and as you'll have noticed, I'm also knitting it inside out, and that's because I find knitting inside out really helps with my tension when it comes to stranded colour work. Even though I'm a loose knitter, I just find knitting with the wrong side facing outwards means that you have a larger circumference of your work on the outside, and the right side, which faces inwards, has a smaller circumference. So it just helps you keep the tension on those floats nice and loose. You can see there's still lots of stretch in my work. Quite often, if you get really tense or your colour work's too tight, you can pull those stitches and they won't go anywhere because your fabric's too tight. So I definitely pay a lot of attention to trying to keep that stretch in my colourwork fabric. So the cardigan is being knitted in the round. I've got a steek somewhere. Here, I'm coming up to the end of the round, so I've got a steek at the front, and when I've finished I'm going to reinforce that with a bit of crochet and then cut the cardigan open. There will also be a steek at the neck, and there will be a steek for the armholes, and the same at the top of the sleeves. There'll be a steek where you cut the sleeves open. For those who aren't familiar with colour work, this is because it is just altogether more pleasant to knit your colour work in the round, because it means that you can, a couple of things. It means you can keep the right side facing you at all times, so it's easy to keep track of your chart and where you're at. It also means that you're only knitting and not purling. Generally, I'm somebody who enjoys purling. I don't feel averse to it, but purling in colour work is a little bit awkward. You have to do kind of gymnastics with your fingers, and it's a little bit tricky, so I don't mind it if it's necessary, but if there's a way to avoid it, I would much rather avoid it. So that's how this pattern's being written. And speaking of the pattern being written, that's another thing that I'm taking nice and slowly and not rushing myself. There's a lot of maths involved with grading a knitting pattern, and I find that I really have to be in the right mood. I'm somebody who does enjoy a good bit of mathematical problem solving, but only when I'm in the right frame of mind. I'll know it when it arrives, and I will actually enjoy the job, but until then I'm just allowing myself to avoid that task because I'm not ready. And let's be honest, I've got quite a lot of knitting to go before I have a cardigan sample ready anyway, so I'm not feeling like there's any huge rush. I've been asked a few times when I've shared colourwork knitting before to show you some close-ups of my hands and how I'm holding the yarns, because I am a continental knitter. I carry the yarn in my left hand, and when I'm doing colourwork I carry both of the yarns in my left hand. So apparently that's a little unusual. I think often people carry one colour in their left hand, one colour in their right. But I personally find it more comfortable to keep them both in my left hand. So I'll show you a close-up of how I hold and control the yarns. So you can see I'm set up with the right side of my work facing me, even though it's inside out. I think often people think when you say work your colourwork inside out that makes it more difficult. It doesn't. It just means to flip your work. Instead of working with your needles like this, you just flip it so the body of your work is tucked away and you still have the right side facing you. So now I'm going to pick up my working yarns. My dominant colour is the pale colour, so I'm going to wrap that around my little finger, and then my background colour around my ring finger, and then I tension both of those across my index finger, so that as I'm knitting, and I now have 7 stitches in a row with my background colour, I can just pick up the colour that I want to knit with. Now, because it's 7 stitches, I'm going to want to catch that float of the contrast colour. So instead of going over to pick it up, I'm going to go underneath the contrast colour, pick up that one, and then for the next stitch I will go over, and that catches the non-working yarn on the wrong side. And once I've done that, I'll just stretch my stitches out a little bit to make sure that there's plenty of give in there. So that's my 7 stitches in a row in the background colour, and then I want to do 5 in a row with my foreground colour. So again, I'm going to need to do some catching of the non-working yarn. In this case, I go through the stitch, I go underneath both, I wrap around, and then I can catch the non-working yarn. It's a little bit fiddly, I guess, remembering which way to wrap to make sure you don't twist your stitches. But once you've got the hang of it, I find having those yarns in the same hand really helps with the flow of my colourwork and the tension as well. Be careful when I'm stretching those stitches not to slide them off the needle. And then here, when I reach my stitch marker, that means I finished one pattern repeat, and I'm going to go on and repeat the chart again until I get to the end of the round. I'm absolutely loving including a mending segment in the podcast. As I've said before, I'm mostly doing it to prompt me to get on and repair those things that are lying in the mending pile, but it also means that I get to show you my old favourite projects. And the ones that I've pulled out today are these Underwing Mittens by Erica Heusser. And this is actually a pattern that I have knitted 3 times over because I love it so much. And I imagine I will knit it again. They're just a perfect project for giving away as a gift. But these ones here are the very first pair I made, which I made for myself. And the problem I've got is that the ribbing around the thumb has split and it's starting to run away. So I'm going to pick up and rescue those stitches and just re-knit this bit of ribbing around the thumb. So I don't have any yarn left from the exact ball that I used for this project because I used the scraps up in some other project at some point. But I do have another ball of the same colour because it's one of my absolute favourite colours of Jamieson's of Shetland Spindrift, and that's Birch. It's this beautiful brown with flecks of gold and a bit of red in it. I really, really, really love it. I definitely would like to knit a whole jumper with this colour at some point, but it's one that I almost always have bits of in my stash because I like to use it for lots of different things. It's just a really beautiful shade. So I'm actually not having a lot of luck picking up these stitches, so instead what I'm going to do is grab my snips and just cut off that bind off right at the top there, and then what I'll do is I'll unravel gradually from the original yarn, and then I should be able to pick up the stitches. Those are not going to work. We need to get the serious scissors involved. That's more like it. So hopefully from here now I can find the original working yarn and get those stitches back on my needles. And I'm choosing to do this kind of repair rather than just darn it because my gloves get an awful lot of wear and tear because I'm almost always wearing them when I'm walking the dog, even into the spring and early summer, because we tend to go out walking very early in the morning and it's still really cold. Even though it's the height of spring here, it was still about 2 degrees when we went out this morning, so I almost always need a pair of gloves on to look after my hands while I'm dog walking. And because Jack's an on-lead dog, it means that my gloves get a lot of wear and tear holding the lead. So this feels to me like the best way of making them last a little bit longer. So there we go, that's all the stitches undone, and now I can get these back on the needles. I've been making leaps and bounds of progress with my spinning, and I'm pretty excited to share that with you, mostly because it has just come from practicing 15 minutes a day, and when I started committing to that practice, I really didn't believe that I would get to this point, actually to the point where I stopped practicing for 15 minutes a day for a few weeks because I kind of became disheartened and thought, I'm never going to make any progress with this. But I came back to it, and I really feel like in the last week or so I've just made huge amounts of progress with my my skills and my confidence. And the main thing that you'll notice being different between this time and the last time that I talked about my spinning is that I can now draft and spin at the same time. This feels like a complete revelation. Before I was kind of pre-drafting the fibre and then spinning it on the spindle is really quite a separate process, and now I can do both things at the same time, and that just it happened like a click. After enough practice, I suddenly felt I can do this. It takes a lot of faith, I think, to spin that spindle and let it drop and trust that the fibre isn't going to break. But now it feels like I've got to the point where it's a more meditative process. I can do it while talking to the camera, I can do it while talking to people or watching TV or something like that, and I begin to really understand why spinning has such a meditative quality and an appeal for lots of people. I'm definitely getting sucked in. Apart from the progress with my technique, she says, dropping it. Let's rescue that. I don't have anything new to share with you because I'm still working on the same fibre that I was working on before. So it's a green with little bits of kind of red purple fibre in there, and it's a 50-50 blend of merino and Shetland. It's a blend by Hilltop Cloud. I think it was from a club. It was given to me as a gift by a member of my knitting and spinning group. She heard that I was learning to spin, and she had this fibre in her stash, which personally she didn't feel inspired by the colour of, and she knew that it was the perfect murky green for me, so she passed it on, and I've been really enjoying working with it. But I still have about half the fibre left, and I'm determined that I'm going to finish spinning this and plying it before I move on to something else, because otherwise I'm just going to end up with 60,000 spinning whips as well as knitting whips and sewing whips, and I'm just going to try and go gently with my spinning, let it take as long as it needs to take, and not get distracted by the idea of a product, because I don't really know what sort of yarn I'm going to end up with. I know that I'm going to ply it as a 2-ply, so my guess is that it will come out something like a fingering weight thickness, but I really don't know until I do that. It's all an experiment at this point, and we'll see what happens. Maybe by the next episode I'll have some plying to share with you, but I'm waiting at the moment until I've spun all the singles to see what happens next. I've been doing so much sewing lately, and that is largely because at time of recording in May 2020, we in the UK are still under lockdown because of coronavirus. And in many ways I'm very fortunate because my life isn't hugely impacted by that. But it does mean that I have a lot more time at home, obviously, and the time at the weekends that I would normally have spent out or away visiting friends, I'm spending at home, and I'm choosing to use that time to dig into my fabric stash and really get my teeth into some serious sewing. And what that has meant so far is an awful lot of muslin making. I'm pretty determined to find my ideal pair of dungarees and trousers, and I shared in the last episode a disastrous pair of dungarees that I made that I just decided to scrap that muslin and start over. And since then I've made another trouser muslin from a birder pattern, and they were kind of a disaster too. They weren't dungarees as such, they were a pair of high-waisted trousers, and the fit was just ridiculous. My body shape is that I am quite small on my top half. I have a very small waist and small bust, but I have quite curvy hips and an ample behind, and that's particularly difficult for trousers. I've always found it difficult to buy trousers in the shops, to the point that I completely gave up about 10 years ago and switched to wearing dresses and skirts because they just fit me better. But I just really want to wear a cute pair of trousers, particularly dungarees, but I also have an idea of wanting to wear tweed trousers with a nice pair of braces, and they would just be so cute. So I'm determined to figure this pattern problem out. So that high-waisted birder pair that I made were written off as a disaster, not because the fit was so bad. It wasn't terrible. The legs fitted quite well. The waist was just a little bit too big, but the way the waistband was constructed was almost like a small corset, I suppose. It didn't have any boning in, but it did have 14 pattern pieces. I'm not about to start making pattern adjustments to a waistband that has 14 pattern pieces. So I've put that pattern to bed, and I returned to another pair of birder trousers that I'd made a few weeks beforehand. I'd sort of half finished the muslin and given up because it was just way too big. And the problem with the birder pattern I chose is it came from a magazine, and the way they lay out their patterns is they superimpose them one on top of the other. So the page that you have to trace the patterns out from is intense, and it took me most of a day just to trace out the pattern. So the thought of returning to that pattern and having to cut out a different size was really quite overwhelming. However, after I made the second disastrous pair of trousers, I returned to that muslin and thought, do you know, it's really not as bad as I first thought. It's not that far off. The shape of the legs was really great, and the waistband ended up only being about 3 inches too big. So I decided to hack into those pattern pieces, and the way that I did it, I decided I was going to take out 8 centimetres from the width of the overall trouser. So I got each of the pattern pieces and I cut a vertical strip, 2 vertical strips of 1 centimetre out of the front leg and out of the back leg. So if you think 2 centimetres in each front piece, that's 4, and 2 centimetres in each back piece, that's another 4. That makes 8 centimetres out altogether. And it worked pretty well. The resulting trousers still have a little bit of a gape in the back waistband, but I found that if I narrowed the waistband, I just tried folding it in half, that actually the fit was pretty convincing. So yeah, I may well be ready to try making those trousers in a real fabric. But in the process of doing that, I shared some pictures of that muslin on Instagram, in my Instagram stories. And somebody, I think it might have been a couple of people, sent me a message and asked, is that the Sugardale pattern? and I didn't know what they were talking about, so I did a little Google and discovered Sugardale Patterns, which I'd never seen before, and they are an independent pattern publisher that have currently 3 patterns. But the amazing thing about them is that they all interlock and interconnect with each other. So at the moment there's a dungaree and trouser pattern, there's a boiler suit all-in-one pattern, and a skirt, and you can mix and match them. So you can make a shirt dress with the boiler suit and the skirt, or a pinafore with the dungaree bib and the skirt. They're fantastic. And the trousers are quite similar in construction to the Birder trousers. They have 2 pleats at the front, darts at the back, and they fit on the natural waist. So I'm feeling a little bit conflicted. I definitely want to try out the Sugardale pattern because it's a dungaree, and all I want in the world is a pair of dungarees. So I'm looking forward to giving those a go. But before I discovered that pattern, my plan was to turn this Birder pattern that I've finagled to possibly make fit me into a pair of dungarees. So I'm feeling like I'm in 2 places very close to what I want. So I think what I'm going to do is make another muslin and decide which one I like best and figure out where to go from there. The thing that edges me towards the Sugardale pattern is that instead of having a zip front fly, it has a zip at the side, and that's a feature that I really like. I'm not a fan of a front fly. So yes, I'm going to be doing some more muslining. But I don't know about you, but when I'm sewing, I feel frustrated if I don't have a finished product at the end of a session, particularly if I've been working at it all weekend. So I decided last weekend that I just wanted to spend Sunday afternoon throwing together another version of a pattern that I'd made before, and that is my green pinafore dress, which you've seen me make before. It's a McNicol's pattern, but this time I made a couple of changes to make it fit me better, even better. So the first time I made it, I widened the hips to make a little bit more room for my behind. This time I also narrowed the bib at the front. And that's because with my previous version, my red one, I was finding that when I sat down, I was getting a lot of gaping at the front here. So I narrowed the front, and I think I'm much happier with the way that this is fitting. It seems to sit really nicely. And I've done the same finishing as I did last time, so I'm just going to unclip and show you that I have added Liberty fabric onto the facing, which is a really pleasing detail. Nobody gets to see it, but I know it's there, and I really love that about these. The other thing to say about these is that the corduroy is stretch. It's 97% cotton and 3% elastane. And this non-observant shopper here did not notice that when she ordered it. I ordered it online from Ray Stitch in London, and I picked it because it was green. That's my ultimate priority, is the colour. I didn't realise until it got here that it had some stretch. I'll just show you how stretchy it is. It's got quite a lot of movement there. I was worried that that might be a technical problem with the sewing, but it went through my machine quite well. I got a few kind of puckers as I was going, but nothing that a good ironing didn't sort out. And I have to say, the stretch makes a humongous difference to the comfort. I didn't really think it would matter because this is like a loose-fitting overall dress. It's nothing that's tight to my skin, but it is so lovely to have that extra movement in there. To the extent that I've gone back to Ray Stitch and ordered a bit more of this stretchy corduroy in a couple of colours because I want that level of comfort in my dungarees and trousers when I get to make them as well. Something else that's happened with sewing, which is terribly exciting and I think I deserve a special medal for, is that I have got my overlocker out and been using it. If you've been following the podcast for a while, you'll know that I've been the proud owner of an overlocker for maybe 5 years. And soon after I bought it, I threaded up and used it once, and it was okay, but it was scary. I'm scared of it. It has a blade, but I decided that this time where I'm doing a lot of extra sewing, this is really the time when I need to get to grips with it. So I pulled it out and I used it to overlock the side seams for this corduroy dress. But the real thing that got me to pull myself together and get it out the cupboard is that I've got some plans to make a few stretchy projects this weekend. Particularly, I'm in need of a couple more pairs of leggings, and I'm going to be having a go at making some underwear as well. I've been completely inspired by Katie of Inside Number 23. She's been making some underwear recently, and I'm going to be giving that a go because it's a real gap in my wardrobe. Don't worry, I won't be modelling any of it on the podcast, but I'm looking forward to sharing the process of learning how to do that with you. When I talked about what I was reading in the last episode, I was revisiting one of my favourite books of all time, which is the C Quartet. At the time, I was still reading the very first book in that series, A Wizard of Earthsea, And do you know what happened? I loved it so much that I actually went straight back to the beginning and started reading it yet again. I don't think there are many books in the world that get better and better with rereading, but I really think A Wizard of Earthsea is one of them. And so I don't have a new fiction book to share with you this time as such, because I've just gone right back into the beginning of The Wizard of Earthsea, and I'm really, really enjoying it. But I did want to chat with you about a non-fiction book that I've picked up, because as a very exciting part of my research for the Lichen issue of the Green Bean, I decided to become a member of the British Lichen Society. And I heard about them through my friend Katrina Chapman, who's a fellow illustrator, and she, I don't know if she came across them on Twitter because she follows them or because of a hashtag that she follows, but she came across them posting beautiful photos of lichens and sent me the link. And I went and visited their website, and they seem like a lovely bunch of people. They also have amazing lichen publications. So upon getting my membership, which was a gift to myself, I invested in a couple of their books. You get special prices as a member, which is one of my reasons for signing up. And a particular one that I've been enjoying that I wanted to mention to you is this one. It's called Lichens, an Illustrated Guide to the British and Irish Species by Frank Dobson. What this book does, which is something I've wanted for ages but haven't been able to find, is have photos of literally every lichen that has been discovered and named in Great Britain and Ireland. It's a monumental book, and it was not inexpensive, but I think, as you know, a way of stepping up my interest in lichens, I'm just thoroughly enjoying it. And learning so much. It's incredible how much there is to learn about these amazing beings that I didn't know before. So I've just been really absorbing this book bit by bit. The way that it's written, it's definitely got more of an expert reader in mind. So at first glance, it seems quite inaccessible. But if you go through at the beginning, there's a really good glossary, illustrations and information, and then once you get into the way that the book is written, you understand all the abbreviations and language that's being used, which is really helpful. But for me, as a kind of amateur with a very keen interest, but not so much like technical interest, so my interest is not always in identifying the particular species and knowing their name, but just getting my head around the diversity and being able to recognise one species from another even. I'm finding the book really, really helpful in that sense. So I'm really, really enjoying it. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of the Green Bean podcast. Hope you've enjoyed spending a bit of time here and hearing about what we've been up to. I want to finish with a special thank you, first of all, to everybody who supports the podcast on Patreon. We have a wonderful community over there, and I'm incredibly grateful for your support, which makes the podcast happen. So thank you to all of our patrons. And also thank you to Will McNicol, whose amazing music you've been hearing throughout this episode and almost all my other episodes. He is an incredible guitar artist, and I recommend you check out his work. If you want to keep in touch with us between now and the next time, the best place to do so is on Instagram, where I am at Katie Greenbean, or by supporting us on Patreon, where you get access to extra episodes, vlogs, and various other bits and pieces over there. So that's it. Thank you again for hanging out with us, and we hope to see you soon. Take care. Bye.